Okay, welcome back. I'm Matt Dukes, and this is Higher Powered Radio. And the good news is we're talking about addiction and recovery today. And so I know we spoke just a few moments about what that means and what that looks like, but let's talk about it from the standpoint of how we start to identify it, whether it's in your life or in somebody else's life, and what the recovery process is. Because I can tell you, everybody's got the horror story. Everybody knows what it looks like to have your family torn apart, or your neighbor's family, or whether it's your cousin's family or somebody at work, and the change and the struggle and the abuse and the neglect and the abandonment that comes with all that. Man, it is horrific to use those words because sometimes we wash over them, and they're so calloused of a meaning because we've seen so much of it that we get numb to it. But the facts remain. When you're in that, or you're watching somebody go through that, the struggle is real. And so when somebody finally gets to a point, or when I finally got to a point, and I'll talk about my experience a little bit, when I finally got to the point, and I can tell you, I mentioned that the spirituality of this is that I've always known that there was some sort of higher power, God, spiritual being, creator that was manifest in this world, in this life, and I always knew that there was something out there. But my identity to that was something that was very heavy-handed in my life, and it was very much if you're not acting appropriately and if you're not good enough, then you're not getting good things in your life. And so it was almost a punishing, and it was almost an unachievable agenda for me. And what happened is, when I started to look at some sort of recovery models, and I was in and out of that recovery for a long time, before it became something I was willing to accept, because there's a big difference between admitting it and accepting it. I can tell you, I admit it. People admit all kinds of stuff all the time, but they'll never accept what the real basis to that stuff is. And so when we look at how this stuff manifests, and when I had to start facing the consequences of my life and looking at what I was doing, what I was suffering through, what was going on, and how I had burned through job opportunity after job opportunity, I'd burned through relationship after relationship, I'd burned through family member and money and vehicles and houses and all of the stuff that we strive for in life, and was left again in a position of not having it again, not having the ability to get up the next day and go start that hustle or maintain my sanity or maintain my livelihood. I was faced with a choice and what they refer to it as that bottom. And so I was faced with that choice of what do I do about it? And I can tell you, for me, in one of the struggles that I see in today's society is that because of the amount of resources and centers and programs that are out there available to people, there is a lot of interruption in that use. That what it does is, I think it prolongs it more than anything. I can tell you, I went through a lot in my youth, and a lot of the times it was interrupted by these brief periods of sobriety that had nothing to do with a desire to not drink or get high and stay sober, but it was more so out of this set of circumstances in my life where it was either people in my lives who were influential enough that were able to make me sustain it, were able to make me be sober for whatever period of time that took effect. But it was never something that was in my heart or my mind as a desire to do that. And so when I finally got to that point where faced with the calamity, and one of those texts I talked about where it talks about recovery, says that we cannot recall with sufficient force the pain of the consequences of a day or a week or a month ago. And that may be a paraphrase, but those of you that know that sentiment know what that means. When I am faced with an opportunity at times to drink or get high, and when I'm in that act of addiction, I can't recall with sufficient. It's not the consequence I just had last night, where the fight with the family member, the fight with the girlfriend, or the fight with the relationship, or whatever that was, or the ticket, or the spending the money, or whatever that looked like. There was no way that I could conjure up enough of a reason not to, because in the throes of that, and that's why you see your kids, or that's why you see your neighbors or your spouses or your family members struggle with that, where you look at them and eventually it gets to a point where you look at them with this disdain that just says, why don't you stop? God, just go away from me. And that's why you see broken families and lifelong damage to people, whether it's the spouse or family member, the child, who struggle again now hereditarily because it's ingrained in them, where they see this programming like software, like scratches on an old LP, where it just skips again and again and again and again. And so I know that there's a lot of times that we look at these people in our life and we go, oh my God, you're just, you're too far gone. It's never going to change, or I don't understand how you got that bad, or why you're not able to just stop. But I want to give you some hope in that, because there's never a time where somebody's hopeless. They may be helpless at the moment. They may not be able to see their own calamity, and there may be, and I hate to use this term of tough love, but there may be times where decisions need to be made because of the damage that's happening to those around that family, or the damage that's happening around the workplace, where those people need to be removed from it. But they're never hopeless. There's always hope, because I can tell you, I was of that mindset. I was of that kind where it was so egregious and so repetitive that, it finally got to the point where I had nobody left in my life. And in that moment, and as I talked about God earlier, no matter what my conception of what he was, or what I thought that was going to look like, because I can tell you, for me, the struggle was that I had a greater fear at times of what my life was going to look like if I really made a decision to allow God in my life in a heartfelt, mindful way that was impactful. I was more afraid of what that was going to look like because of what society was telling me. That I have to be a man, I have to be tough, I have to be self-sufficient, I have to support myself, all of those things, versus, oh, you found religion, right? Or he's got God now. And because that stigmatism that came with that. But the irony is, it took more courage, and it takes more strength in my life right now, and I'll be very candid with you, to sometimes stay present and stay in my faith than it would be to abandon it, because it's of self, and that goes back to that malady, that when I have that conflict that affects my thinking, that says, man, why is this worth it? What does this matter? Why do I do it? And that's why you see relapse after relapse, because if there's not healing and growth that comes from the pain and the discord that happens in addiction, then what does it matter that we're not drinking or getting high, or not eating, or not shopping, or not gambling? What does it matter? Because I can tell you, if you don't replace it with something of greater or equal value, we always go back to what we've left. And there were a lot of things in my life that really, the only way that was evident they weren't in my life is because they had claw marks on them. Because I can tell you, it was very difficult for me to let go of a lot of stuff. So when we started to talk about the difference between acceptance and or admitting and acceptance, like I said, I could admit it to anybody. Oh yeah, I drink, and I'm a drinking problem, and I got a problem, and I got a problem. But for me to accept it to the totality of, oh my God, this is something that is ruling and ruining my life, and I can't not do it, is when I was finally faced with having to make a decision of whether I was actually going to do something about it or not. And in that space, no matter where you're at in your life, and I pray that most of that happens for people today very early on, because that's what I said, with the resources that are out there for the treatment. And then let me tell you, just briefly, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but with the resources of treatment and the money that are out there available to people right now, you can arrest this, and there is a solution to all of this stuff very early on, because I don't want anybody to think that that model doesn't work, because it does. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of failure that happens in it, but that's because there's an old saying that says you must completely give yourself to this, to recovery. It is not a choice of parts of, they talk about it being a spiritual part of, or a recovery part of. It becomes a way of life. And the social stigma has gone away from the fact that somebody says, hey, I don't drink anymore. It's like smoking. You tell somebody I don't smoke, it used to be like, well, you don't smoke. And then, mind you, that was probably 40, 50 years ago. But today in society, you can say, hey, I don't drink, and that's not an issue anymore, because you hear the old movies that say don't trust somebody that doesn't drink. Now today, that's not the case. And so as we start to look at how we actually move into that recovery model and what the tools and resources are out there for you, I want to, again, make sure that you know that there's hope in all of this. It's never a situation where you're left alone. If you need to call in, the number here is 888-404-1010. If you need some resources, if you need some direction, you need some assistance in something, by all means, let me know. But we're going to talk when we come back a little bit about how the family dynamic is going to get some help in all of this, what those programs are like, and the differences between some of them, and where we're going to come back from that. So right now I'm going to throw this over to Mark for traffic, and we'll be back on Higher Powered FM.
Matthew, the time is 5:31. Live traffic is next. Someone else is negligent.